There's something weird happening, so let's mute everybody for now.
I was actually wondering if that was somebody thick in cicada country.
Right. It's a good Heartland summer sound. Okay. Well, it's 7 o'clock, which I think means it's time to get ready. Are we recording, Kate?
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Carrie Obrey, one of the directors of Heartland Summer, here to bring you an uplifting night of children's literature and beautiful art. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to dive right in. First, though, I'd like to share a moment of reflection. As a curfew falls on my city, I'd like to acknowledge the grief we're experiencing in our country from race-related violence. We appeal for justice for Jacob Blake, as well as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and for all the Black lives we've unnecessarily lost. For their courage, we thank Anthony Huber and the other unnamed person who died in Kenosha this week. May we all come together and do better. Tonight's format was conceived of when we found ourselves excited about all of the wonderful children's books pitched to us by our publisher partners. These books are visions of that better world. Thank you, Candlewick, Lerner, Hachette, Chronicle, and Algonquin for working with us to make this event happen. There'll be many opportunities to win final copies of these books tonight. Pay attention to the chat field for those links. Please enter all the giveaways and thank our publisher and author friends. And as always, use chat generously to share your thoughts with one another and to ask questions of the authors. Also, I am delighted to share surprise announcements tonight. 2 authors here, and this is just by chance, are finalists for the Heartland Booksellers Award in the category of Children's Picture Book. These results just came in, so you will all be among the first to know. So, all right, on with the show. Here with us is Tricia Speed Shaskan to help bring all of these books to life. I met Tricia at one of our events a few years ago and was struck by her good humor and awesome glasses. As an author of 50 books for children, I wanted her to help us celebrate this genre. Her latest book, The Itty Bitty Witch, is illustrated by Cindy Yan. Tricia also wrote the picture book Punk Skunks and the young graphic novel series Q and Ray, which are illustrated by her husband, the author-illustrator Stephen Shaskan, who I believe has also joined us this evening. Tricia and Stephen enjoy hosting story times and teaching creative writing workshops at libraries, bookstores, and schools. They live in Minneapolis with their spoiled dog, Beatrix. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you, Carrie.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good, good.
That's great. So when we chatted about this event, we got very excited for it. And I learned something I didn't know about you, is that in order to become a better and more creative children's book author, you worked at an independent bookstore. You want to tell us more about that?
I do. So years ago, when I decided I'd focus on children's books, I actually took a job as a bookseller at Wild Rumpus Books here in Minneapolis. And as many of you know, it also doubles as a pet store. So the store is filled with live chickens, makes, cats, and chinchillas. And so it was just as magical as you would imagine to work there, and also hilarious. I actually ended up wrangling animals. I remember one of the times I did was for the 25th anniversary of James Howe's Bunnicula. I was actually in charge of keeping the bunnies from escaping a cage. Anyway, from there, what I learned though was I actually got to meet a ton of children's book authors and creators, such as the awesome people who are on the panel today. And I got to learn about the latest and greatest books. And that was a really great education.
Well, given where we are in the world right now, I think a very pertinent question to ask you might be what children's books can do for us during tumultuous and challenging times.
I think children's books have a really important place. And I think what they can do is they can give kids that space to experience and connect with books, but in a safe space. They can connect through emotions, they connect through ideas and experience, and also they can empathize with other people and themselves. For example, I've seen this time and time again with children's books, and we have a variety of books tonight to talk about that do a variety of different awesome things. But when I was touring for our book Punk Skunks that I wrote and my husband Steven illustrated, I would bring my drum set to schools and we played music. And I would have tons of girls come up and say, are those your drums? Are you a girl drummer? And that they wanted to be a drummer and they hadn't seen one. And, you know, it reminded me of me at 12 when I saw Sheila E. doing The Glamorous Life and could relate to that and looked up to her. But kids also, of course, like they really relate to the part in the book where Kit gets really angry after her friend and her get in a fight. And so there's these small connections, but there's even bigger ones. As a teacher, I've read the book Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson and illustrated by E.B. Lewis many, many times to kids. And if you don't know the story, which you probably do, it's about the relationship between Chloe and a new girl at school named Maya. Maya tries to befriend people at school, including Chloe, but everybody dismisses her friendship and then she leaves the school. When I read this book to fourth graders, what I remember the most is the stunned silence at the end, where kids just took in the story and asked, isn't Maya coming back? And she isn't. And this was a book that really helped them kind of sit and work out the difficult feelings of being the new kid and how they can be treated, which was really powerful, especially at the school I was teaching that had a whole bunch of new immigrants who were all new kids to the school. And so the thing is picture books can get that bridge where kids get to use empathy and they can sit with different emotions and work through them and become better kids. And, you know, not only that, but they can imagine, they can laugh, they can learn. And you're going to see all of these different types of connections kids can make and make personal from the books that we have today on our panel.
So with that, I will go ahead and start the presentation for our various authors. We'll start by introducing Kenneth KRAEGEL. He is the author and illustrator of 3 picture books, including King Arthur's Very Great-Grandson, a New York Times Book Review Notable Children's Book of the Year. His first chapter book, Wild Honey from the Moon, was named a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2019. Before making picture books, Kenneth volunteered at an agricultural school in Honduras, helped refugees find jobs in Chicago, volunteered with an NGO in Uganda, was a laborer on a construction site in Wyoming, and worked on vegetable farms in Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio. He now lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan with his family. Coming September 8th from Candlewick, This is a Book of Shapes shows us a bunch of adorable animals engaged in hilariously absurd pastimes. Kenneth is going to tell us all about it. But first, I get to reveal our first finalist. Kenneth's previous book, Wild Honey from the Moon, is one of our 4 finalists for the Heartland Booksellers Award in the category for Children's Picture Book. Congratulations, Kenneth KRAEGEL.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's see. So this is my this is the new book. This is a book of shapes, and it comes out. Let's see, September 8th, like you just said, and it's a board book. So my last book, like Carrie mentioned, was a first picture books or a first chapter book. So it was a longer picture book, and then of course this is short. And I have a especially sort of fond place in my heart for board books, because when my son was little, he would just, you know, sit on my lap and we would read it before nap time and before bedtime. And I think that's what I like about board books, is that they get read. Like picture books get read a lot, but board books, because there's so much time before nap time and bedtime, they just get read a lot. So it was a pleasure to make this one. Okay, so I'm going to just share a screen here, and I'm just going to read you the whole thing since it's pretty short. Okay, here we go. This is a circle. This is a square. This is a triangle. This is an emu pushing a pancake wagon down a hill. This is a rectangle. This is a diamond. This is a porpoise reading a book of knock-knock jokes to 3 silly sea turtles. This is a star. This is an oval. This is a rhinoceros wearing a jetpack and skateboarding across the desert while singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Kenneth, I'm going to jump in. Your slides aren't advancing. Were you intending to?
Oh, yeah. That's too bad. Let me,
There you
huh.
go.
Are they advanced? Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, we'll just see it with the screen here. Okay, so this is a circle, a square, a triangle, an emu pushing a pancake wagon down a hill. This is a rectangle, a diamond. This is a porpoise reading a book of knock-knock jokes to 3 silly sea turtles. This is a star. This is an oval. This is a rhinoceros wearing a jetpack and skateboarding across the desert while singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This is an octagon. This is a pineapple. Wait, a pineapple? What is that doing here? After all, this is a book of shapes. All right. So every time I read that, it kind of puts my mind in a pretzel, and I was the one who wrote it. Okay, stop share. Yeah, the idea for it, I did while I was illustrating Wild Honey from the Moon, and I just wrote it down on these little sticky notes here, and that became the book. When I was doing Wild Honey from the Moon, I was in my mind, right next to my drawing board, I had Where the Wild Things Are. I'm a self-taught artist, and so whenever I have questions or when I run into illustration problems, I don't necessarily have a framework to work from them from, so I'm kind of teaching myself. So I would study Where the Wild Things Are, and that fit Wild Honey from the Moon well in terms of landscape and palette. So that was really helpful. So then for this book, since it's a goofier book with you know, some wacky characters, I thought what I would do is study or reference Dr. Seuss. So for my first illustration, I did this emu here, and it was one of those illustrations I was the most proud of. I couldn't find any major flaws, and I was really happy with how the green came out in the grass. And so I took a photo of it and emailed it to my art director. And then I got a diplomatic response saying, like, it doesn't really look like, it doesn't look like an emu. It's just kind of some fluffy bird. We don't really know what it is. And that doesn't make any sense with the text. And so I was bitter about it for a few days. And then I eventually drew the emu that's in the book, and now I'm really happy with it. I'm glad they pushed me to do it right, because emus are they're just funny birds as it is, and they don't really need any embellishment. So that's it. That's my pitch. I do want to say thank you to all you independent booksellers. You're the ones who get my books, and you're the ones who sell it. And I hope you're all doing well. And I appreciate you. Thanks.
Go ahead, Tricia.
Well, our next presenter is going to be KALIA Yang. And I'm just making sure, can you hear me, Carrie?
You're good.
Okay, good. All right. KALIA Yang is a Hmong American teacher, public speaker, author, and international treasure. A graduate of Carleton College and Columbia University's School of the Arts, KALIA lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she resides with her family. I was first introduced to KALIA Yang through her award-winning, beautiful nonfiction books written for adults. First, The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir about the immigrant experience. Please read it if you haven't. And her equally beautiful second book, The Song Poet. But what strikes me most about KALIA Yang is that no matter if you're having a casual conversation with her or listening to her being interviewed, she speaks the truth and speaks from the heart, as do all the stories she tells. KALIA is the author of 3 children's books, The Shared Room, Somewhere in the Unknown World, And the book we're here to talk about today, The Most Beautiful Thing, coming from Carol Rhoda Books and Lerner Publishing on April 6th. Drawn from KALIA Yang's childhood experiences as a Hmong refugee, it's a warm-hearted and true story about a young girl finding beauty where she never thought to look. In a starred review, Kirkus says The Most Beautiful Thing is full of poignant storytelling and stunning visuals. Also, I have exciting breaking news. A Map into the World is one of the 4 finalists for the Heartland Booksellers Award in the category of children's picture books. Congrats to you, KALIA. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're excited for you to discuss The Most Beautiful Thing.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you. I'm feeling a little flushed now, but I'm delighted to be here with you all. I'm going to read directly from the book first because I think this book can speak very loudly for itself. But this is my first time reading The Most Beautiful Thing to any audience, and you are the right ones. The independent booksellers are my favorites. So please, The Most Beautiful Thing by KALIA Yang, illustrated by KRAEGEL. My grandmother is so old, no one knows how old she is. Not me, not my big sister Doug, not our older cousin Lei. My father waits patiently when we try to guess her age. He is grandma's 9th and youngest child, and even he does not know how old she is. We know that my grandma was born on the other side of the world, across a wide ocean. My grandma came from a time and a place where creatures lurked in the jungles, waiting to chase unwary children. She told us that she once looked into the gleaming eyes of a tiger and felt its hot breath on her face. By the time I was born, my grandmother already had an old woman's face. Her skin was soft but dry like paper, and in her mouth was a single tooth. Grandma said, "It is the only thing standing strong in my mouth, this final tooth that my mother and father gave me." I asked to see a picture of her parents. She said, "Menai, they lived in a time long before the Hmong learned of such things as photographs." She pointed to her heart. "The only picture I have of them is here." The luckiest of the grandchildren got to help take care of Grandma. Lei got to wash Grandma's clothes by hand at the bathroom sink with sweet-smelling pink soap. Doug got to wash Grandma's soft brown back in the bathtub with a soapy cloth. And me? I got to clip her fingernails and toenails while Grandma sat on her favorite stool in the light from the window. I can still feel the roughness of Grandma's heels in my hand, the thickness of her toenails in between my fingers. I can see the bottoms of her feet, thick and brown and broken, deep cracks filled with the dirt from long ago and far away. Grandma told me that her mother and father died when she was a little girl. Grandma was just a child herself, but she had to take care of 2 younger brothers and baby sister. I looked up at my grandma from the place where I sat at her feet, and I asked her, "How did you get food for them?" Grandma said, "I didn't find enough food. We lived always with hunger eating us on the inside." All my life with her, even with just her 1 tooth, Grandma never said no when we offered her something to eat. The ice cream truck was singing its song from down the street. I looked underneath the couch for quarters. There were none. So I got ice cubes from the freezer. I offered one to Grandma in my red plastic cup. She smiled at me. When I wanted a new dress to wear on the first day of 3rd grade, my mother said she did not have enough money. She found some nickels and a dime in her purse and offered them to me. I bought hard peppermint candies from the neighborhood grocery at the corner of our block. When I got home, I offered one to Grandma on the palm of my hand. She smiled at me. At the round table with its shaky legs, I used my spoon to mix and mix in the center soup bowl we all shared. There were no pieces of meat, only bones and soft greens. My father said, "The price of meat is too expensive at the market, Menai." I found a thick chunk of bone and offered it to my grandma on my spoon. She smiled at me. We had plenty of meat only when we celebrated Hmong New Year with our aunts, uncles, and cousins. The old table was heavy with whole boiled chickens, more than our family could ever eat. After dinner, our bellies full, my cousins and I sat on the carpet around Grandma as she told us stories. She always began, "It was a long time ago, and I was just a girl." As we listened, our eyes grew round. Grandma twisted her fingers one over the other to show us the hands of a bunzong, jungle spirits the size of children. She taught us how to listen for the cries of the fearsome Pinuvai by holding our breath until our hearts pounded in our ears. We were always sad when Aunt Ju called, "Time for the children to help clean up." On a cold day when the snow blew onto the window panes and the light was dim, I asked Grandma about the dirt in her feet. She told me she didn't have shoes after her mother and father died. She went shoeless to the mountains to tend to the family field. She ventured into the jungle to look for wild roots, bamboo shoots, and edible mushrooms. And one day she was chased by a tiger. As she fled, her bare feet broke open on the fallen branches, and she still ran, blood and dirt mixing into clay with each step. I squeezed her feet in my arms, and I pulled them close to my heart. A hug for the road she's walked to get to me. Each year, cutting my grandma's nails became faster because I grew stronger and bigger and more able. Each year, Grandma's feet grew smaller and smaller in my hands and my lap. Her stories, too, slowed with the passing years. The pauses between her words grew long. And then I'm going to skip ahead to the very last page. So one day, young KALIA notices that her teeth are not even and she really wants braces. Her mom and dad don't have the money for them, but instead of saying no, her mother says maybe next year. And her grandma from her place in the window, she said, "KALIA, is my smile not beautiful?" And when she smiled for the very first time, KALIA saw who the little girl used to be, the girl of her dreams, her grandmother. She understood how through stories they've met. And not only have they met, they've loved each other. And so I think this is a very special book because it is about one of the most special human beings I know. But it is also a book that I think was very necessary for all of the kids who can't have the things that they feel they believe they needed. Not the frivolous things, but the things that they believe they needed. I wrote this book because as a parent, there were things I wanted to give my children that I couldn't, and to remind myself that it is enough. So the book is very many ways for me and for my father, their grandpa, who feels every time Christmas rolls around that he has so very little to offer them. It is a reminder that the most valuable things we have to give to each other are not the things that money can buy, that you could be poor in money, but rich in love. And so I'm so delighted that you're my first audience for the most beautiful thing. Thank you for having me.
That was beautiful as always, KALIA. Thank you. Let me get my bearings. We are going to switch now to a pre-recorded message from the authors. I'm not on mute, right? You guys are all good? You can hear me? Was that a yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, there's some weird thing happening here with all these different windows. There's so many. All right, our next presentation is a pre-recorded one from the author Heather Dean Brewer and illustrator Luen Pham. Their book, Love is Powerful, brings the January 2017 Women's March powerfully to life in the pages of a picture book. Heather Dean Brewer is a writer, artist, and art director who designs books for kids and adults and loves to ride her bike in the woods. She lives in Michigan with her family. Luen Pham is the illustrator of the Princess in Black series by Shannon and Dean Hill, as well as many other books for children. Luen Pham lives in California. Love is Powerful is based on Brewer's real-life experience in the march and seeing her young friend Mari, the lead character in the book, lifted above the crowd, her voice echoing down the streets of New York City. Kirkus calls it a feel-good tale with lots of heart, as you can see in this presentation. Oh, I'm sorry, Zoom is just minimized somewhere and I don't know where to find the screen sharing option. Why is it hiding? Why don't we move on to the next author? Tricia, would you introduce yours and I'll figure out where my Zoom options are.
You bet. Our next presenter, actually our next author is Tricia Umregar, who is a professor, award-winning journalist, lecturer, and author of the best-selling adult fiction novel, The Space Between Us, and its recently released sequel, The Secrets Between Us, as well as many other acclaimed novels. A Midwesterner who lives outside of Cleveland, Ohio, Tricia was born in Bombay, India, and came to the United States when she was 21. From an interview, I learned Tricia began writing when she was 6 years old, what she now lovingly calls anonymous hate poems, to her parents. Whenever her parents told her no for any reason, she wrote a rhyming poem, then pinned it up with Scotch tape in a place where they'd find it. For her, writing was a creative outlet for things that couldn't be expressed in any other way. Umregar's debut picture book, When I Carried You in My Belly, was published with Running Press Kids, Hachette, in 2017. Her newest book for children, Sugar and Milk, also from Running Press Kids, will be released on October 6th, a timely and timeless picture book about immigration, refugees, acceptance, intolerance. It's illustrated by KRAEGEL. Please tell us about your beautiful new book, Tricia.
Thank you very much for that rather embarrassing introduction, but also a generous introduction. I appreciate it very much. And thank you to independent booksellers for being here and for championing all our work and for what you do every single day. I understand that these might be pretty hard times for some of you, but I so sincerely hope that we get through them together. So I just wrote out a few things basically about why I wrote Sugar and Milk. I don't know, I guess if we are screen sharing, I don't know if you can see the book, if you can see the jacket of the book. But I'm just so proud of this book and I'm so happy with the illustrations. And my only regret is that my father is no longer alive to see this book, because this is a book about my ancestors and his religion and our traditions. And I think he would have just been tickled pink if he could have seen this book. Just real quick, I did dedicate this book to my father, and I said, for my beloved dad, Nasir Umregar, who taught me the ancient lessons of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. So I belong to a very, very old religion called Zoroastrianism, and those three things are the basic tenets of the religion. So Sugar and Milk basically is a story within a story. The modern story, which frames the older one, is about a young child who comes to America to live with her aunt and uncle, and who, despite their best efforts to make her feel welcome and at home, feels terribly alone and shy and lonely in the States, in America. Then one day, her aunt asks her to go for a walk and recounts for her an ancient legend about how a group of travelers who were fleeing persecution came from Persia to India, basically asking for refuge and asking to be allowed to stay. So I grew up in India and I had heard the story practically my entire life. It is basically the story of how my Persian ancestors were allowed into India, where they came to be known as the Parsis of India. And the wit of the Persian priest and the generosity of the Hindu ruler has always touched my heart. Most importantly, the moral of the story has stayed with me. When I myself immigrated to the United States when I was 21 years old, this legend, this story became a kind of blueprint for me about how to conduct myself in my new home. The story always reminded me of the wonderful things that can happen when people from different races and countries and belief systems interact with one another. So this is, in a nutshell, this is how the legend goes. When the Persians arrived at the shores of India, they were met there by the Hindu king, who was sort of the ruler of this little town or place where they landed. He had no intention of letting them in, but since everybody spoke a different language, there was this communication barrier, and he couldn't just tell them that. And so he asked one of his men to fetch him a glass of milk. And he proceeded to fill that glass with milk all the way to the very top. And then he kind of pointed to it as a way of saying, I'm so sorry, but there's literally no room for you. You know, we are full up. So now comes the part that used to just thrill me as a child, no matter how often the story was told to me. The Persian priest, who was the head of this expedition, asked one of his men to get him some sugar. And he proceeded to dissolve the sugar into this glass of milk very, very slowly and deliberately, being very careful so as to not spill a drop. And in turn, he then pointed to this glass and his meaning became clear. It was his way of saying, if you allow us to stay, Almighty King, not only will we not disrupt your way of life, but we will actually sweeten it with our presence. And the story goes that the king was so moved by this gesture that he welcomed the Persians, my ancestors, to India, where they lived, loved, and thrived, and did their best to fulfill their ancient promise made almost 1,000 years ago about making life sweet for the people around them. You know, I had shared this story with audiences before, and their reaction used to always take me by surprise. People loved hearing this story. But a few years ago, I began to think that the people who most needed to hear this story about kindness and generosity was not adults, it was kids. And given what we are facing as a country right now, given how the entire world appears to be slamming its doors shut on the most desperate and poor among us, I thought that this timeless story about acceptance, about hospitality, about kindness was also very timely. The chance that this Hindu king took on this ragged band of Persian refugees has paid off handsomely over the centuries in terms of the contributions that the Parsis have made to the growth of modern India. From the musicians Freddie Mercury of Queen fame and Zubin Mehta, to the industrialist J.R.D. Tata, to the nuclear physicist Homi Bhabha, to the novelist Rohinton Mistry, Parsis have been on the forefront of every aspect of Indian life and Indian culture for centuries. And similarly, it's impossible to imagine America without the contributions of immigrants. Our hospitals would be understaffed, our scientific breakthroughs would come to a halt, and Google would not exist. As the saying goes, immigrants, we get the job done. You know, every time I have told this old sugar and milk story to modern audiences, I have seen people's faces soften. They nod in understanding. They sigh out loud at the goodness at the heart of this old tale. And I believe that is what ultimately we all want, to be good. And now, thanks to the illustrations of a brilliant young illustrator in Vietnam who has somehow brought an ancient Persian tale to life beyond the wildest expectations and hopes of her Indian American collaborator, I hope that this 1,000-year-old story can act as a blueprint for many of us as to how to welcome the stranger, how to celebrate our great human diversity, how to take a chance on one another, and how to think of the foreigner as simply the friend we haven't yet made. And lastly, I hope that this little book helps us to imagine how to always live a life that adds sugar to milk, that attempts to sweeten the lives of our friends and neighbors, our towns and cities, our beautiful country, and this gorgeous, glorious world. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tridi. That was just beautiful. Exactly what I wanted to hear tonight. So I already read the introductions for the previous book by Heather Dean Brewer and the Wen Pham, the book Love is Powerful, about the Women's March of 2017. So we're going to go right into the videos.
Hi, my name is Heather Dean Brewer, and I'm the author of Love is Powerful. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of the Heartland Summer Forum. I'm excited for this opportunity to share with you a little bit about this book. I'm recording this message from my home in Muskegon. I wish I could join you live, but when you have your conference, I'm going to be on vacation where all Michiganders go, which is, of course, up north. In this case, I'll be up north in Copper Harbor, which is this tiny little town with about 100 people. There's no cell service there. There's very little Wi-Fi, so I'll be completely unplugged. One of my all-time favorite independent bookstores is in Copper Harbor, and it's called Grandpa's Book Barn. They have a wonderfully curated selection of books, and it's a really charming place to visit. If you're ever in Copper Harbor, you have to go. I've probably already spent way too much money there. So Love is Powerful was inspired by the real life experience of a little girl and my friend named Mari at the 2017 Women's March. If you turn to the back of the book, there is a letter to the reader that Mari wrote herself, so you get a chance to read about her experience in her own words. If you were to talk to Mari today, she's a little bit older. In fact, her 11th birthday is on the same day the book comes out, which is September 8th. Mari would tell you that her experience at the Women's March was life-changing. It was the moment that she discovered the power of her own voice. And I'm so grateful she had that experience because she does have a powerful voice and she has very meaningful things to say. And I guarantee you, Mari is a name that you're going to hear in the future. She's going to be a change maker for sure. So I want to read to you a passage quick. It struck me a little bit differently this time when I picked it up and reread it again. Mari spilled her crayons onto the table. They made a messy rainbow. "What are we coloring, Mama?" she asked. Mama smiled, a message for the world. Mari ran to the window and pressed her nose to the glass. Far below, people walked in different directions. Buses, cars, and taxis honked and grumbled down the busy street. Reading this passage today, it feels more relevant now than it did even then. It feels like we are going in different directions. The noise on social media, on TV, and our news, even like within our own families and friend groups, it can sound a lot like honking and grumbling at times. And as you watch me talk from a screen, we can probably relate very much to Mari and her nose pressed up against the glass, kind of looking out onto the world. And instead of different directions or honking or grumbling, we might use the words uncertainty and divisive to describe what we're seeing and what we're feeling. So we aren't in a place all that different than where Mari was in this story. But Mari doesn't stay there, and neither should we. Mari goes on this journey with her mama, a journey that's rooted in kindness, and along the way, Mari discovers her voice. And in the end, it's not the honking buses or grumbling traffic that fills the street, it's Mari and her message of hope. So when I wrote this, I didn't want to just give an accounting of the Women's March, but I actually wanted to capture that pivotal moment that Mari experienced. And I also wanted to get to the root of what motivates people to change, which is human goodness, because goodness always outshines hate. I hope you'll give Mari a chance and take this journey with her, and that if you're in a place where you feel like you can't do anything about what's going on around you, that you'll find your own voice and end up in a place of empowerment and hope. Thank you.
Just 1 second.
Hi, my name is Leywin Pham, and I am the illustrator of Love is Powerful by Heather Brewer. It's coming out in September. Hopefully you guys all have a copy in your laps right now and you're looking over the pages. I'm very sorry not to be there in person today. I'm really, really missing people during this whole lockdown. Zoom is never quite the same thing. And I'm not quite as good on Zoom as I am in real life. Believe me, I'm a much more charming person in real life. So I'm pre-recording this because I think Heather's got the excuse of being on vacation, but me, I don't know, I'm just not a Zoom girl. I've got a couple minutes only to talk to you about my new book, Love is Powerful. I never know where to look on the camera. Love is Powerful. This book is a really, really special book for me for a lot of reasons. I'll be honest, when the first Women's March happened, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was very ill prepared for a march. I'm not really a social media person, and because the cultural zeitgeist seems to be happening online these days, I knew that the march was coming, but I didn't realize the ferocity behind it, the energy that was getting people going. So when I showed up in Atlanta, I was actually there for a book conference. There were a whole bunch of my friends all ready to go with massive signs, and I was one of the few people who didn't have a sign. I sort of like to think of this book as the sign that I should have made. I'm not really a very demonstrative person, but the last few years have made me realize that the common citizen has to come out, has to stand up for what it is they believe in. I still haven't changed. I'm not a whole lot about going out and demonstrating, but I believe so much in the protests. I believe so much in what people are trying to accomplish. And I'm hoping that I'm doing my part by making books and by promoting the idea of protesting and how powerful your voice can actually be during this time. To that end, this book is quite the protest book that I could have come up with. It's a special book for me because I wanted to make sure that everybody who was in it was a real person. So almost every face, and that couldn't be every single one, but almost every single face in this book is an actual person based either on a photograph that I found online or friends that I knew who I had sent in their pictures to me, all the way to I made a Facebook post, one of my rare ones, requesting people to please send me photos of themselves and their kids during the march, and possibly showing me their signs. And what I got back was an overwhelming response. I did not think I would hear from so many people who were so incredibly excited to share with me their experiences, their photos. Some people told me incredibly tender messages about how personal the march was to them, what their personal involvement was. There was one woman who told me that her mother had been hospitalized right before the march, and that she had gone to the march in response to her mother being sick and her wanting to change the world. If you look throughout this book, you'll see that they're just filled with these incredible personal stories, which I'm so happy to have been able to portray, and I only hope that I did it justice. You can see how some of the faces are incredibly young kids, and that to me is a big deal that we're able to find a way to channel our voice into a new generation. What better way to do that than through a kid's book? And this book, the entire thing is right in the title. So I'm hoping you'll enjoy this book. I'm hoping you'll promote it. I'm hoping you'll send it out there. I wish you all well. Thank you so much for giving me the time to talk about this book. And I hope and pray that we'll be able to see each other soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Awesome. My jaw dropped when I learned that a lot of the characters are based on real life people in that book, so I think that's really cool. Moving on to our next author, Anna Katz. Anna Katz writes and edits fiction and nonfiction and has worked with a number of publishers, including Chronicle, W.W. Norton, and Simon & Schuster. She holds degrees in psychology and movement therapy with additional studies in writing and editing. She says her background in mental health and social services pairs perfectly with her work in writing and editing. Both vocations are about helping people clarify their thinking and express themselves effectively. She lives with her family in Seattle. Her latest book, The Art of Ramona Quimby, will be released next week by Chronicle Books. As the subtitle says, it covers nearly 65 years of illustrations from Beverly Cleary's beloved books. Please tell us more about it, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Let me screen share. Thank you for having me, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. So, the book I'll be talking about tonight is The Art of Ramona Quimby, as you said. It's with Chronicle, and it's out next month. You all probably are very familiar with Ramona Quimby. We love her, and most of us have loved her for a very long time. So the first book was written in 1955, and it's an 8-book series. The last one was written in 1999. So that's a 45-year spread. And then since then, in the last 20 years, there's been 2 new editions. So I'll be in the book, I talk about 5 of the primary artists. There have been lots of other artists who have contributed to this book. There's been TV shows and movies, but I stick to the 5 main ones. And I come from a place of love. All of the artists add something brilliant. And as you probably all know, Beverly Cleary is brilliant. And so it's about the pairing of the art with the writing. So Beverly Cleary, she is currently 104 years old. And here she is in the 1950s with her writing assistant, Kitty. The first illustrator was Lou Darling. He illustrated the first 2 books of the series. Unfortunately, he died at the early age of 53 in 1970. So his style is kind of this classic comic book style, and a lot of people consider him, vintage Ramona or classic Ramona. Alan Tiran took over for him for the 3rd book of the series in 1975. You might recognize the little button eyes and the mushroom noses and the decidedly 1970s haircuts. He was the primary illustrator from 75 through 1999, and he stuck with this aesthetic the whole time. Meanwhile, Joanne Scribner was doing some of the covers, and all of the illustrators have fine arts backgrounds, but she really brought that to these covers, and they're just gorgeous. In 2006, Tracy Dockeray took over, and she has a more cartoonish style, and she used shading, which helped to kind of update adding different types of people to the book. And then in 2014, Jacqueline Rogers added her take. She was just fantastic with emotion. I love that side eye that Ramona's giving right there in the middle picture. So my big important thesis statement, and this is definitely not an academic book, that's not the tone at all, but when I was trying to organize my thinking, this was what helped me to figure out why kids love it, why adults love it, why we've loved it for 65 years. So I think that the 4 big elements of the perfect writing and art pairing are the aesthetic, of course, the culture, so using the art to update to modern times, and then making the universal specific and vice versa through world and life events and emotion. So in the first two of those elements, aesthetic and culture, we have from a scene from Beezus and Ramona, which was published in 1955. So on the left is Lou Darling's illustration, and you can see the neighbors. They have their purses and their day gloves, and they're wearing their heels, and Beezus has her little bobby socks, and Ramona's showing off her scab, as Ramona likes to do. And then on the right is the 2013 version, where the neighbors are wearing sneakers, and one of them has a visor on, and they're wearing jogging, what look like jogging gear, sweatpants and whatnot. So, you know, this goes to the aesthetic, but also in 1955, women weren't trying to get their 1,000 steps. So it's a little bit updated so that kids and adults will recognize these characters and relate to them. This is a scene from Ramona and her father from 1970, published in 1977. And so the main plot is that Mr. Quimby loses his job. And I believe that this was probably inspired by the recession that was happening in the early mid 1970s. And also probably Beverly Cleary tapped into her experience growing up during the Great Depression. So this is a somewhat angsty book. When I was looking at these pictures last year, it was a different experience. You know, we were all living large and pouring champagne over our breakfast cereal, and things were good-ish. And then, of course, this year, a few dozen million Americans have lost their jobs. So this changes. But because Beverly Cleary, she never talks about a recession, there's no kind of grown-up speak. It's just a girl worried about her dad, who is worried about not having a job. And the way he's dealing with that is he's chain smoking and he's binge watching TV. So I think, you know, as a kid, we can relate to her worry and her feeling of helplessness in the face of her parents' struggles. But then, of course, as an adult, you know, some of us these days are binge watching TV to deal with certain stressors. This one, on a lighter note, this is kind of a life event one. To the girls' shock and horror, they are discovering that Mr. Quimby has thinning hair, and then Mrs. Quimby has gray hair. You can see from the look on their faces how horrifying this is. And so I think reading this as a kid, we can relate to maybe looking at an adult and having that sort of reaction. And then a few decades later, maybe a child kindly points out our graying hair, and we realize that we're on the other side of that. So I think this is why we continue to love this book in every stage of our life. And then lastly, just emotion. Cleary does such a beautiful job of depicting emotion, you know, Ramona being so emotional, and then all the other characters having their own universe. And then pairing that with the art, so it is easy to relate to Darling's rage up there in the left-hand corner, and then Tigran's bedtime anxiety down below. We have Scribner's shock and surprise. We have Doc Ray's love, that heartwarming hug. And then, of course, Roger's injustice in the upper right corner. And that is the book.
Wonderful. I absolutely loved Ramona growing up. I always wanted to boing Susan's curls, just like Ramona. Thank you so much for that great presentation. I can't wait to read the book. Our last presentation for today is poised to make a big splash this fall. Released by Algonquin Young Readers on September 15th, Skunk and Badger is the first in a brand new middle grade series from Amy Timberlake and John KLASSEN. It's featured on the Fall 2020 Indie Next list. Skunk and Badger has received star reviews from Kirkus, Booklist, and Publishers Weekly. And this review from author Adam Rex, who calls it fresh and warm as a waffle, more please. When I worked at Wild Rumpus Books for Young Readers, I was first introduced to Amy Timberlake's writing when I read, loved, and sold many copies of the hilarious Golden Kite Award-winning picture book she wrote, The Dirty Cowboy. Amy is also the author of the Newbery Honor book, One Came Home, as well as the middle grade novel, That Girl, Lucy Moon. Amy's worked as a book reviewer, columnist, and children's bookseller. She grew up in a small town in Wisconsin and now lives in Chicago. John KLASSEN is best known for his delightful Hat trilogy, of which he's both the author and illustrator. His books have won a Caldecott Medal and 2 Caldecott Honors and other international awards. He lives in Los Angeles, California with his wife and son. So, Amy and John, please introduce us to the life of Skunk and Badger.
Hi, thank you for having us. I am so appreciative of all that you guys do. And I'm really happy to just have the opportunity to be here. I did see that Susie from the Bookseller is in the audience. So I just want to say, hey, hi, Susie. Okay, all right. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about where Skunk and Badger came from. And then I'm going to ask John some questions that I've been dying to know. So Skunk and Badger, for me, had its beginnings in research for another book. And for this research, I was reading a lot of classic kids stories about bears. So I was reading Winnie the Pooh and Paddington Bear and Beatrix Potter stories and a bunch of fairy tales with bears in them. And the thing was that I truly loved rereading A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh stories. And this led to a couple of questions. First, I started to wonder what kind of story I would write if I wrote a story like Winnie the Pooh. And so it wouldn't be an imitation of Winnie the Pooh. What I was thinking was, what would it be like if I wrote one in my writing voice, in my kind of style, and with my sensibilities? Like, what kind of story in this genre would I tell? And say, you know, it's kind of episodic maybe, and it had, say, animals and sweaters, and what would that be? And then that led to the second question, which was, what kind of story and experience did I most want I want to create for kids? And I immediately remembered my parents reading to me in bed. And I thought, oh, I want to do a read aloud. I really want to do a read aloud. So what I tried to do with Skunk and Badger was create something that a kid can read for themselves. So that's fine, that's taken care of, but that it's also made for reading aloud. And I want you to be able to read aloud well on the very first try. So, you know, I wrote in sound effects. So there should be sound effects in here, and it was super fun to do. Anyway, I wrote 2 chapters of this story called Skunk and Badger, and I sent it off to my agent, who is Steve Mock at Writer's House. And he said he wanted more, so I wrote some more. And then he said, I'd like to show it to John KLASSEN. What do you think? I was like, well, that sounds pretty wonderful. But I knew John's books, of course, and I'd seen his sense of humor, and I'd seen the way I'd seen his sense of humor, and I'd also just seen how he times things out on the page. And I just thought, yeah, John would be a great fit for this book, but would he like it? I don't know, but why not let him see it, you know? So now I'm going to turn it to John. John, what did you think when you first got the story, Skunk and Badger, from Steve?
I loved it. Of course I loved it. It's an amazing story. It's, I think when you were talking about just now, when you were talking about Winnie the Pooh, that fits so well with the things I liked about it, because I don't think I pull this off in anything I do myself, but it's something I always admire in books and I'd like to try to get better at. And that's sort of like, it seems like the goal for Milne and for almost this one, but in a different kind of way was sort of establishing a place as much as a story or characters. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's almost an ambient goal or something where you feel like you just hung out somewhere for a while. And that's so powerful. And it's what I always remember about books that I really loved, is just how it felt to go there. And so that's what I got from the book. It was like there were moments I could really pull to illustrate, and the sense of it was really suited to me. But it was also just, I think that you and I sort of had similar things we loved about books that we had growing up, or like when we think about these read alouds or this specific kind of book, it felt like we liked the same things about them. And so sort of to the goal of, I was hoping we would line up with sort of how I wanted it to feel visually and sort of design wise, because it felt like we already did.
Yeah. So then after you decided you were interested, and then and then we went through the whole process and we sold it, which was its own thing. How did this, how did the initial idea develop as you worked with Elise Howard and Laura Williams at Algonquin Young Readers?
I think that they were really amenable to things I was suggesting, in terms of just even the trim size and the paper we were using, all of it I got to sort of weigh in on. And that was really fun, because normally I don't get to talk about all that stuff. Some of it I do, but not with the chapter books that I've worked on before. With the picture books, I sort of get to talk about it, but I'd never really designed a book like this before. And it was so much fun that they were so into everything we talked about. There's a really interesting trim size to this one. We really just wanted a handsome object. For the bookstores, as much as anything else, we just wanted to picture something on the shelf that was really just going to feel like a handsome object, to match this handsome, cozy feeling story. And so I think that general goal we always kept to, and I think it informed most of the decisions about the paper and the fonts and just the off-whites and all of that stuff. Everyone seems like we had a common goal, which was a real luxury, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, I was really pleased whenever I just saw anything. Actually, I think I think, oh wait, there it is. It's on the screen right now. There's Badger at his rock table, and I think that was the first one that I saw. And Elise like sent it over, and she tried to call me so that she could get my response like immediately. But I seriously screamed, because I was just like, oh, there he is. There's Badger. He's sitting at his table. And it was so funny, because I didn't know what it was really going to look like, but I felt like, no, that's him.
I think that one I was nervous. I think that you can tell I was nervous with the first one, because it doesn't show very much. It's mostly in the dark. There's little details and things here and there, but I think that the first one you're always a little nervous about, because you don't know if anyone's going to like it. And so there's a crack of light to show what I wanted to show, and it's just like, maybe this. So I'm really glad.
Oh, it's funny. That's the shy John KLASSEN in the book.
That's the crack of light in the door. Yeah, it's just me.
Oh, that's funny. All right. So let's talk about the boards under the book, under the dust jacket. All right, it's up on the screen.
Yeah.
So you pull off the dust jacket. If you put the book on the table like that, then it's almost like you can just walk straight into Badger and Skunk's brownstone, which is so cool. And that seems pretty unique to me. So I wanted to know like how that happened.
I don't know if I was focused on uniqueness as much as I just really love brownstones. And I think you and I have that in common too. There's so much to draw, and there's so many great little details to fill in a space, and you can be really loose. It's all about filigree and sort of height, but also it's cozy. It's both those things together, which is such a great combination for an illustrator. At first, my initial really weird pitch to Algonquin for the package was that we do that hardcover with that illustration without any text on it, and then we wrap a band. Like the current cover is sort of a band on top, and I wanted to wrap a physical paper band so that you could take the band off and this would be your book. But I think we decided pretty quickly that we probably have to wrap that to keep it intact, or if we didn't, our poor booksellers were going to kill us, because this thing was going to get beat up. And we were going to get a bunch of returns and all sorts of stuff. And so we thought, well, let's just design it with a band, and let's do us all a favor. But also just, the idea of like the book feels like a little diorama. The whole thing feels like they're moving about in this small space. And with dioramas, you always want to look in the window and like feel the space. And I sort of wanted the book to feel like that as an object. So I'm really glad that went over well because I've always wanted to do it. I don't know if a friend of mine said he hadn't seen that done before, at least, but with the band coming off, it must have been done. I'm sure booksellers have seen this before with like a sort of a band design and then a full thing underneath. But I couldn't think of an example, but I know I've ripped that off of something.
Yeah, well, it sounds cool. So anyway, I just well, anyway, I think that's the end. That's all I have, but I just wanted to anyway, thank you everyone, and thank you for selling our books. I really appreciate it.
I need to unmute myself. Thank you, Amy and John. I am definitely a brownstone enthusiast myself, so I cannot wait to pretend that I'm inside one when I'm reading your book. It's just delightful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. People are saying their heart is so full. That's what kids' books do for you, and authors and illustrators bringing such great messages to the world. If you'd like to save the chat, to save all of the book giveaway request links, you can click on the 3 dots and go ahead, and then that URL will be there for you. Other than that, this is all recorded, so we will be sharing it widely and people will be picking it up again and again, and let's all stay in touch and read some great books this fall. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.